Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised.
We had a lot of fun with my naivety, as we were doing crime scenes.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying you can't watch a few episodes of CSI and be a CSI expert?
Well, interestingly enough, that is the theory that some people have. When I've gone to court, a lot of the jurors watch CSI. They watch all this stuff, and so a lot of the questions you'll get pertain to that, because they've seen something on CSI. And I have gone to crime scenes where they have actually told me what I need to do because they watch CSI, and it's really quite comical in some sense because these people are trying to help. They're not trying to be in the way. But I got to put a little thing in for victim advocates, because they certainly helped me a lot when I go to these scenes. The victim advocates would keep the family and the people kind of out of the way, and explain things to them, and they were just so imperative to a good investigation, in my opinion.
Francine, welcome to All Things Crime.
Thanks, Jared. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, finally, we've tried this before, and now we finally got together, and it has been too long. So I think we're on episode like 36 or something like that for All Things Crime. And it's taken me this long to get you on as a guest,
Well, I'm glad to be here. It's not because I haven't wanted to. It's just been really busy.
Right. Better
Lots
late
of crime
than never.
out there.
Yeah. I know you are just amazingly busy. And so just excited to have you on. And for all of those watching and listening, this is Francine Bardole. She is a dear friend of mine. And she is also just a consummate professional in the forensics world. She was a crime scene investigator for 20 plus years and has all sorts of experience. And I think you'll be amazed also at her background. And we're gonna talk about all of that. So met Francine going on 10 years ago when she was a crime scene investigator for West Jordan Police Department. And now she is retired and doing her own thing. And so, Francine, I wanted to welcome you to the show and give you that brief introduction, but most importantly, give you the chance to introduce yourself and tell the audience who you are.
Well, thank you, Jared. Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of history behind how I'm where I'm at right now. It didn't happen until a little bit later in my life when I'd raised my children. I went to college and I was going to become a lawyer. And in that process, they told me that I couldn't work more than 12 hours a week the first year because it would be far too demanding, which with raising 5 children, that wasn't about to happen. So I kind of put that on hold, and I went in another direction. And I did do internships out at the old prison. It used to be the 288 Correctional Facility out here in Utah. And this is a facility that they built to bring younger men in so they could be habilitated. After, they were younger, they thought if they put them in with the older men that they would get bad ideas and become worse. And so they put him in the 288, and this was an experiment. Well, needless to say, the experiment didn't go very well because you need a lot of older males and alpha males to keep the younger ones into line, believe it or not, is part of the animal kingdom as well. And so they changed the program, and now it is the women's prison. So I did an internship there for, not the women, but with the 288 for a long time. And I find it really, really interesting. I felt that this was something maybe I might be interested in, instead of law. And as time went on, I was able to finally get a job at the old Salt Lake Metro Jail. This is the old one. This is the olden days. It's a era in history that will never happen again. And it was the most exciting place to work in the whole wide world. I remember standing out there and thinking, I love my job. It was smelly, it was nasty, it was awful, and I loved my job. So this is where I got to see how real life was, when you work with people that are arrested and criminals, and some weren't criminals, some were arrested for other reasons. And it was just kind of interesting. And I truly liked working there. And as time went on, I ended up being kind of a court liaison for pretrial services and the court. So when I'd go to court, we would, the defense or prosecution, depending, would want to probably have a recommendation that they get released on pretrial or that they don't. And I took the job really serious. And I'll tell you, I went over every name that was going to go to court to see how they'd been with pretrial releases in the past, if they met criteria. And I'll never forget, I kept interrupting when they'd say, we want them released to pretrial services. And I remember this is my first day, and I interrupted and I said, no, Your Honor, I have no, there's no reason to believe he'll carry through, because the last few times he's been released, he didn't follow through. And I kept doing this. And all of a sudden, it's time to go to lunch. I'll never forget this judge. I love this judge. But he looked at everyone. He says, court is dismissed. And he pointed at me and he said, except for you. And I'll never forget that day. I felt my heart beating in my forehead. I knew I was in trouble. And he came walking down off that bench in his black robe, and he looked at me and he was all serious. And he said, I like the job you're doing. You're not just sitting there letting things go by. You're doing a great job. This is so good. And I'm going, I thought, oh my gosh, everything just dropped. I just thought, oh my gosh, thank heavens. And then I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I wonder how many things go by the wayside because people don't pay attention, or, people are released maybe that shouldn't be. And it just started my curiosity. As time went on, I finally took on a position with the state of Utah as an independent contractor through adult probation and parole. And this was really interesting because I got to do pre-sentence investigation reports. What that is if somebody pleads guilty to a crime, they have 30 days before they're sentenced. So in that 30-day period of time, my job was to interview these defendants, either in jail or prison or at adult probation and parole, and basically get their life history from the beginning, when they were born, to when the crime was committed. That could be a lot of information, and a lot of them had a lot of thick files. And I found that so interesting, because I can honestly tell you, there is not one person I interviewed. I did this for almost 5 years, and there's not one, I don't care what they did, that I didn't find something good about. I mean, it was really interesting. And I was able to also see little red flags in their life when things would start changing and when things started happening in their life. And basically, I call what I did a Van Gogh in words, because I thought I did a really good job. And I would kind of paint a picture of this person's life, the good things and the bad things and the terrific, horrific things that happen. And then the court would look at this, and there you would get all this information, and then the court would look at it, and then a determination would be made as to the sentencing of this person. And I did this for a long time, and some of these cases that I did in defendants, they were horrific cases. There were homicides, there were all sorts. And I would have to call the victim as part of this report process, and I would have to talk to them and find out how this crime has affected them. What has this done to your life? And also, is there any restitution owing? And interestingly enough, when I'd call them, they'd be angry at me. I hadn't really done anything. I was trying to get information, but people don't see all the steps that it takes in between, the crime and then the sentencing. And they would get mad and they'd say, well, you paid a lot of attention to me at the beginning, but now I haven't heard from you for a year, or I don't even know what's going on. And they'd be very upset. I mean, and righteously so, I think, I do. I mean, I couldn't even imagine what they had gone through. this got me thinking, what do they go through? I've watched television shows, I've read books, all this stuff that talks about this kind of stuff, but I really didn't know what someone went through on the onset of a crime. So interestingly enough, while I was doing this, a part-time position with West Jordan City Police Department became open, and it paid really bad, but it had a lot of requirements, but it's part-time. And I thought, I want to do this. I want to see what victims go through on the onset of crime. I understand the defendants and their lives and some of the stuff that's happened, but I've never really sat down or I've seen what a victim goes through. So that's why I took that job to begin with. And after after a while, I really liked it, and so I didn't renew my contract with the state, and I went full time with West Jordan Police Department because I could see the need to be there when something happens. You can see the crime, you can see the evidence, everything's laid out in this picture, and your job is to determine from what is there what you need to take back and what photos you need to take and what you need to do to help these families have closure and to help law enforcement solve the crime. And perfect position, perfect. And so I really started paying attention to what I was collecting for evidence, looking at it from more fingerprint and DNA perspective, because that's where we get most of our stuff. I remember the first case I went on, I collected 40 items of evidence. It was a residential burglary. And needless to say, they were not happy I hauled in all this stuff. I thought, I'm going to be so thorough. They're going to be so proud of me. And well, over the years, you'll learn you got to be a little bit more particular about what you're collecting.
That might be a little excessive for a burglary.
It was. Well, I was a newbie. I was learning. I was fresh off the streets. I'd worked with defendants. I hadn't worked, the crime scenes. And I remember when they called me one time, they called me out on a full arrest. This is my first full arrest. And I remember going there and I'm looking at everybody, and I said, well, where's the full arrest? And they said, in the other room. And I went in and there's this person who is dead. And I says, well, where's the person that's arrested? And I thought it was a fully arrested person. I didn't know it was a death. So you can see there was a big learning curve that had to happen for me. And we had a lot of fun with my naivety, as we were doing crime scenes.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying you can't watch a few episodes of CSI and be a CSI expert?
Well, interestingly enough, that is the theory that some people have. When I've gone to court, a lot of the jurors watch CSI. They watch all this stuff. And so a lot of the questions you'll get pertain to that, because they've seen something on CSI. And I have gone to crime scenes where they have actually told me what I need to do because they watch CSI. And it's really quite comical in some sense because, these people are trying to help. They're not trying to, be in the way. But I got to put a little thing in for victim advocates, because they certainly helped me a lot when I go to these scenes. The victim advocates would keep the family and the people kind of out of the way, and explain things to them, and they were just so imperative to a good investigation, in my opinion. So for all you victim advocates out there, I got to tell you, you do a good job. And anyway, so what I noticed was that paying attention to detail and understanding why you are going to collect something. What's the purpose of this? Give you an example. So we go to a store robbery and they take some money. And as they run out, some of the money they took, a dollar bill or whatever, falls to the floor. Somebody says, okay, we're going to take a picture of this. Okay, yes, we're going to take a picture to show that this money was taken and it fell to the floor. Then I want you to collect it, and I want you to process it for fingerprints. Now, if this was a homicide, you might want to think about that, but think how many people touched that dollar. Think how many people touch the counters at the bank. Think how many people touch the doorknobs and how often they're really cleaned and wiped down. So there's a lot of overlays, a lot of things. So you have to be very particular about where you're going to collect fingerprints. You don't want to do it where everybody's been touching unless that's all you've got. And hopefully you have the skills and everything to do what you need to do to collect the fingerprints. But I learned right on that fingerprints were really important and that you had to be careful where you collected them and what you're going to collect them on. And then that led me to some other, I go to crime scenes and I started learning about DNA. And remember, DNA, it really didn't start getting really popular, for a long time. And when I started, I remember in order to get a profile from DNA, you needed a blood drop or a blood spot the size of a quarter in order to get a profile of DNA. That's a lot. Now you only need less than a pinhead. You need just a little bit. Things have come a long way. But I wanted to learn about it. And what set me off on that is I can recall that we had a homicide and it was on Easter and it was so cold and rainy. And the fellow who had been murdered was laying in this big, it was just all this mud. It was just, so rainy and cold. And it had happened early in the morning. And there were all these shell casings. And I didn't really know about DNA, but I had gone to Sorensen Forensics years ago. They did a couple of classes on DNA collection and how to collect it. And so I wanted to go and see what it was like. And I got to know a woman, Carol Raleigh, who worked there. She is just so pivotal in what I do because she is kind of my mentor in the very beginning. She worked for Sorensen Forensics and I called her. She gave me her cell phone number if I had any questions ever. So kind for her to do that because most people will not do that at a training. And on this Easter Sunday, I called her and I said, can you get DNA off of shell casings? And she said, I don't know if it'd be worth collecting. She goes, oh yes, collecting, because sometimes you can get them. And I says, and how about if they're in the mud? And she goes, oh, well, collect them anyway. And because, they were raining and in the mud and we really didn't know. And so I collected them and we became, Carol just was so informative. So I can't even begin to tell you, whenever I needed to know something, I could call her.